Good afternoon. My watch shows it's noon, so we'll go ahead and get started at Faith in the City. So glad that you are with us today. We still have people joining us, but we wanted to go ahead and welcome you to our April session of Faith in the City, talking about how are our students. I'm Sylvia Oberly. I'm part of the planning team here at Knollwood Baptist Church. And once again, so glad that you could join us for our discussion. I'm going to start with just a few housekeeping matters. First of all, I hope no one minds that we're recording our session today. We have many people who may not be able to join us, particularly this month, this week, when it's a break from school and vacations. So we do record and post later, and we'll give you information about how to see that and share with others. A few housekeeping matters. We do like to use our chat function very proactively. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring those and make sure that our panelists have a chance to answer those at the end. And we do welcome your questions as part of the discussion. As we have for a few months recently, we've also ended the meeting at 1, which we want to always do, and end the recording in the formal part of the meeting, but we leave it open for a few minutes afterward, just in case anyone wants to have some informal time to chat, just as you would if we were in person. So we will be doing that as well. We would ask you, as with all Zoom meetings, to mute so that we can have the best recording and the best discussion possible. So at this time, we certainly welcome our participants who are here and others that will be joining us. And I'll turn it over to Dean Clifford, another member of our planning team, to get us started this afternoon. Thank you.
Good morning again, or good afternoon. We're glad you're all here. Welcome to Faith in the City. You know, for the past 3 years, we've been focusing on the topic of how to address and reduce and ultimately eliminate race-based, ethnic-based disparities in education, how to increase equity across all fields in education. This year, we elaborated on that focus by thinking, are there lessons emerging from the pandemic that may help us with that overall task of addressing inequity? I think it's an understatement to say that for most of us, this has been perhaps the most difficult year that we've ever experienced. And we feel that that's true for our students as well. The pandemic has disrupted all of our normal patterns, whether it's in the field of health or economics or family relationships or being confined, cut off from our normal activities and entertainments. Certainly, the isolation many of us have experienced from our friends and family. And then we layer on top of that for our students the fact that school had to close a little over a year ago, and they had to dive into a whole new pattern of education that kept them out of touch with in many ways, with teachers and friends and those that meant so much to them in their daily routine at school. There's been a lot of discussion this year about negative academic impact on students. But more recently, I've seen research increasingly beginning to address the question of what about the impact in terms of mental health, in terms of stress, in terms of social, emotional wellness for students. And there have been some disturbing signs that, in fact, that has indeed been an area of great concern for a lot of kids. Today, we have a panel that I think is uniquely positioned to give us different perspectives about what may be going on locally with our students in terms of their social, emotional, mental health, stress levels. Dr. Leah Erickson, who is with Novant Pediatric Practice in the Lawtown area, is going to be sharing with us her impressions, both in terms of seeing her patients and talking with them and in talking with family members. We have Amber Harrington, who is a counselor at Northwest Middle School. Now that students are returning, in addition to whatever contacts she was able to have with them virtually, she's beginning to get a bird's eye view of what they're showing as they come back to school. And just as importantly, we'll be hearing from a student, Chloe Fletcher, a senior at Carver High School, not only perhaps about what she has personally experienced, but about what she's seeing and hearing from her friends and those that she knows well. So, without much further ado, I really want us to dive into what they're seeing, and we'll alternate some with questions so that each of them will be heard on each question. So I'll start by asking the first couple of questions and then give Sylvia a chance to ask some questions too. Leah, why don't you start us? If you would, as I ask each of you this question, briefly give us an idea of the context in which you've had contact with kids. What's the nature of your contact? Has it been virtual? Has it been in person? Has it been directly related to your normal activities with them? And what are you seeing in terms of the stress levels? Some have said that our students are actually experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're really interested in hearing from each of you about that. Leah, why don't you get us started?
Thanks so much, Dean. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to have this important discussion today. And like Dean said, I'm a pediatrician at Novant Health Waughtown Pediatrics, which is in Southeast Winston in the Waughtown area in a historically underserved area of Winston-Salem. Our clinic has been open since COVID started. Initially, we were seeing a lot more virtual visits, but now we're fully open. We're seeing well visits, sick visits, all visits in person. We do have telehealth available for patients that would prefer to be seen virtually. And I wanted to share a few things that we're seeing that are very different this year from any other year that I've been in practice. The first is the numbers of mental health concerns that we're seeing. One of our pediatric clinics ran some numbers and estimated that they're seeing about 300% more mental health visits this year than they had in previous years. We're seeing a lot of, especially adolescents with depression and anxiety. Adolescents are particularly affected by the social isolation because at this point in their development, they are starting to separate from their parents in the way that they see themselves and attach themselves to a peer group, and that was really taken away from them. There's been a lot of stress around COVID, around fears of themselves or family members getting sick, economic stress with their families. Doing virtual learning has been very stressful. Sometimes, the 11-year-old has been the oldest person in the house during the day that's trying to do their school and manage younger siblings. We have children that have lost family members to COVID. Some of their family members are located in other countries and other places that they haven't been able to, see their grandparents before they died or really be able to grieve the way that they normally would as a family. I've definitely started more patients on antidepressant medicine this year than I ever have at any other point in our career. It's really been difficult for them. The second is the physical aspect of being sedentary for a year. I have many patients that are in elementary school that have gained 30 and 40 pounds in the past year from spending a year sitting at home in front of a computer, not going outside, not having their normal activities, not having access to the normal nutrition. And we anticipate that that's going to have long-term effects on their metabolism and their risks of heart disease, high blood pressure, cholesterol, type 2 diabetes. The third thing is delayed care. So we have patients that have missed well visits, specialty visits, therapies, physical therapy, speech therapy, either due to fears of COVID, to those appointments being canceled, or just not being available the way that they normally have been this year. And then the fourth is school failure. That really, among the patients that I'm seeing, it's become the norm that they are struggling, failing multiple classes in school. A lot of students that had been good students in the past really have not made the transition very well to remote learning and haven't been able to keep up with their work. And that's been extremely stressful for them.
Thank you, Leah. That's pretty alarming. And you mentioned earlier, before we opened up for our audience, that you had read that something like, did you say 40,000 students nationally have lost a parent due to COVID?
Yes, Dean, there was an article in the news today that estimated that 40,000 children in the United States have lost a parent due to COVID in the past year, and that disproportionately affects Black children, that 20% of the children have lost a parent are Black, whereas only about 14% of the population is Black.
Thank you. Amber, Ms. Harrington, tell us a little bit about what you've been able to see and how that changed as you began to move from virtual to in-person contacts again.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me. So let me just start by what happened when we first went home back in March. So when we first left the school building and started remote learning, there was not any real structure developed. And as a counselor, we were told from our district that counselors could not do any school counseling, which was very tough because, up until this point, we had contact with our students. And then all of a sudden, we were told that we could not contact them at all. The only way we could speak with them is like maybe making a phone call to a parent, that sort of way. So we basically had Microsoft Teams and Zoom as ways to contact families, but we were not allowed to do any type of school counseling at all. So start of this school year, we were told that we could, which was a great thing. But the only problem was that lag of time that we lost that contact with students. A lot of them, they didn't see our faces, they didn't hear our voices. Many of them, weren't really connecting online. As far as like looking at the website and following all of those things to know how to reach out to us. So that really was a struggle, trying to be able to establish that connection or reestablish a connection with the students. And I feel like from my perspective, I felt a little bit like it was difficult to try to get into classrooms to try to talk to students because teachers had lost so much time with their students as it was. So it was a bit of a challenge to try to figure out how do I respect the time that teachers need with their students while trying to make sure that I was supporting students, their social and emotional needs. So since we've been back, it's been interesting. I will say during the time that we were solely online, the kids that we spoke with the most, or the families that we spoke with, were the kids that were not engaging. So our whole goal was to try to get in touch with those families, figure out what was going on, and try to, alleviate or figure out how to help support those families. And that would be a lot of the times technical issues with Wi-Fi issues, computer devices, all kinds of things like that, which I will say the district did a great job of rolling out all of those things to the families. But those were the families that were not participating. But we also noticed that families that had parents who had to work, families that had multiple siblings, especially younger siblings, families that I think we realized that some parents just didn't have a grasp on how to get their students to perform, to do the things. We definitely saw a lot of that. I remember I had one parent that told me, I can either teach my kid or feed them, but I can't do both. That's what I was literally told. So it was like, okay, how are we going to help this child to be successful? But it has definitely been interesting trying to get these students to participate. There have been some kids who have done phenomenal through this. I do want to make sure I highlight that some kids have really thrived academically, and even seemingly socially as well. They are just really doing well. They like the virtual learning, and they're finding that the flex day that we offer has really been beneficial. And for those students, when we did a panorama survey that focused on measuring the social emotional effects, they said that the flex day really helped them to feel like they could be in control of their work, they could take their time and pace things out. And that's on the academic front. I had an interesting situation where there's a student who chose to come back in person since we've come back, and when they were away from home, they struggled academically, but when it came back in person, then they struggled socially. But they'd already had struggles socially before, but it was like any issues that could have been related to bullying all of a sudden kind of resurfaced once they came back in the building, which I never, to my knowledge, had any issues with bullying while we were doing only remote learning. Um, but I will say that as soon as we've gotten back in the door, definitely have seen more issues of we're having to do more assessments for suicide and things like that. A lot of students definitely have felt isolated for sure. Um, you know, most of their outlet has been gaming, to be quite honest. That's how they connect with their friends. The problem with that is if they're gaming and there's no structure around it, that means that they can't wake up and get to class and things like that. And I'll add as well, there have been so many changes with the schedules since we've started from all remote to starting to hybrid. I mean, it's been one change after the next. And so they're constantly having to adjust. And, just like the adults, we're all adjusting together. And I imagine, I mean, it's not easy as an adult. So I could only imagine as a child how it would be for them to have to adjust to the time changes. We were starting at like 8 o'clock, and then we moved up to like, first it was 8:15, then it was 8 o'clock, then it was like 7:30. It's like it just keeps bumping up earlier and earlier and earlier. And if there are no parents that are there to really help their students, then they miss class and they just get further and further behind. So yes, we've definitely seen students who have had some suicidal ideation, um, feeling very lonely and just needing that social support. They need to connect with one another. Those have been the biggest issues that I've seen.
Thank you. Chloe, now you're in a very special position to see what's going on, both from your own perspective and from what you hear from friends. Tell us about that. And you'll need to unmute. Thank you.
A lot of my friends, a lot of them, we have like a lot of trouble of just like logging in class and stuff, because when you log into class, it's constantly having you to like, they constantly want you to do your work. It's like, it's not asking you, how are you doing? This is the structure of learning online. I feel like things should be different. And in the beginning, we didn't know what to do. We didn't use Power School a lot. We use we use paper and pen. So it's kind of hard for us to, where do we log in? How do we know what work is due and stuff? And a lot of times, they'll put a 0 in. Then it's like, how can you catch up? You have 3 classes constantly putting zeros in. And then a lot of people didn't have, they didn't know how to work technology and stuff. Using Google Docs, sharing the documents and stuff. And then it was just really hard, because then now with us being in person, we're not really in person still, because you're still on the computer. Everybody's still on the computer. So it's like, what's the point of going to school if you're still on the computer? And it's a lot of us get really mad because we don't have time. Like, they give you an hour. They give you an hour to eat, get dressed, and everything. It's not enough time for anybody at home. And I've seen a lot of friends that used to go to school a lot. They just don't come. They log in once or twice out of the whole month. And, they always get mad at them, but a lot of them were already working nonstop. So I just feel like that's really hard for them to log on to class and then go to work. And then a lot of them come home and have their younger siblings and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then it's the whole thing of the turning the cameras on. I know a lot of people turn the camera on. I personally do not, because it can be very awkward. We're all just staring at each other. And it's like, we take at least 20 minutes out of the whole class to discuss turning your cameras on. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, a lot of people don't they're already feeling like self-conscious and stuff. So turn your camera on doesn't, it can make it even worse. And people talking about you. It is stuff like that, because it's like we changed. So first we had Flex Fridays, and personally everybody I knew loved it. I loved it too, because it made it better, because having in the middle of the week, it just didn't work. Like, everybody had their whole schedule planned, and stuff. It's just no. And then the flex Wednesdays, it feels like, okay, we get a day, but then we still have work to do. So I don't, it's not really helping us in high school because they're still giving us work to do. I have one teacher who still gives us like work to do on our flex days. And you have to turn in by a certain time. And I know people, I personally like to work on my own schedule. Like I like to do my work on my own. And virtual learning has helped, but it doesn't help when a teacher doesn't have like the right structure because we're not in the classroom. So I can't turn the work in by 4 o'clock if I have a class at 3 o'clock. It just doesn't work. Like class doesn't end until 4 for fourth period. Which makes it hard for us to turn our work in, be a good student. And like we already have to deal with not having lots of stuff like, prom, homecoming. I mean, other schools have homecoming, but my school, we're not having homecoming. So sometimes the morale of the students can go down because we're not having nothing, but you want us to do work. You want us to keep on doing it, but what are we gaining?
Yeah.
Because they don't help us. They always say, oh, we're here for you, but they're not really here for us because when we say, hey, I just can't log into class today. Oh, well, you need to do your work, but sometimes people need a day off, like more than one day a week, because some people just can't log in, dealing with the stress of their families, jobs, things. People lost jobs, and it's like, oh, well, they're getting this, they're getting that, but mentally they probably just can't log in. And then I know some people who Wi-Fi, like in my house, it's 4 people on Wi-Fi every single day. So the Wi-Fi's connection is terrible. The work is due at 4 o'clock. It's like, oh my gosh, like you can't, your Wi-Fi messing up. You can't hear the teacher on Zoom. It gets really hard because it just doesn't work out. And then we went from shorter class periods to longer class periods. And that didn't help because you're at the computer longer. We don't get a time to have self-learning. Like, okay, well, y'all can log off. Before we had it, but I don't know why they changed it because now it's like I'm looking at you, you're looking at me. I'm like, what are we doing?
Chloe, I wonder if you could talk. There's so many questions I'd like to ask you. It's hard to know where to start. But I know that I have read that for seniors especially, there have been some real losses in terms of your senior year, in terms of applying for college, that sort of thing. What are you hearing from your friends about that?
They don't really know where to start because with us applying and stuff, some schools want SAT scores, some schools don't. We don't know where to really start. And our counselors, I mean, they're helping us, but I feel like it's harder in high school because they can't help every student individually. So some students, like, you don't have the chance to like, hey, what can I do? I know my school don't have like a way to like, you have to set an appointment up and stuff, but sometimes with class, you don't want to miss schoolwork.
Right.
And it just gets really hard. You have to choose, am I going to write this essay for college or am I going to do my work? Because now you're getting so much work. You're not having like a set hours to, at school you have a set hour and you get out and you have, homework and stuff. Now it's like homework is the whole day and you don't know which one to pick.
Well, I would like for our audience to join me in congratulating you for the fact that you've already been accepted to Spelman. That's terrific. So one more question before we shift to a second one that I might throw in here, Chloe. We've heard from Ms. Harrington that for some students, the virtual learning set them free from bullying or other social emotional concerns. And once they return, that started back up. So have you seen anything positive in terms of social relationships with the pandemic, or was bullying a big problem that you were hearing much about?
So a lot of people, I know some people were bullied, but I feel like with virtual learning, they're still being bullied because we have Snapchat, Instagram and stuff, and people are always constantly, like talking down on people. So it doesn't really help. I know with TikTok lately, people can post a video, but if you have comments, being mean, what's the difference between being in person? Because it's kind of a little better because you're able to turn your phone off, but then you think about it, that's all you have. It's your cell phone.
Interesting comment. Your phone is what you have for your contacts. Yeah. Well, let's shift gears to our second question. What do you think has been the most important factor in contributing to stress and difficulties for students? I've heard Chloe, you're talking about the technological differences. Any other comments about what has made it especially different or difficult? Ms. Harrington, maybe you could start there. What do you think has been most difficult for students?
Well, I just wanted to thank Chloe so much. You gave a really good view from a student perspective. And I wanted to just say that as a counselor to a student, it's very difficult for us to get a hold of students because, now that we can speak to students, we usually use Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Well, if you use Zoom, you have to have an appointment lined up. With Microsoft Teams, we can actually call students directly and hope that they'll answer for us. Unfortunately, a lot of times students either don't get the calls, ignore the calls. I'm not really sure what happens, but that's us trying to reach out to students. And a lot of times we don't get to connect. And it could be because they're like, well, who is Miss Harrington again? Like, I don't know if I've seen her name before. Because we're not the regular classroom teacher, it does present some challenges. And like you stated as well, finding the right time to do so. What was interesting for me was when we were doing the remote learning, I felt like I was able to better connect with families. And I think for me, it's because I was contacting them after regular school hours. And so I was able to get them to pick up for me, which was really good. But I would say definitely the technology piece, trying to figure out, making sure that they understand that we want to meet with them. Several of my students did not know how to check their emails, use their emails. As a matter of fact, my student services team, we've actually done a workshop on how to do those things because it's, that's the thing. When we went out with all of this going on, there were a lot of skills that were not in place for students. And at my school, we do have the one-to-one technology, which is the iPads that Verizon Wireless. There's a grant that we do have, which is great, but everybody doesn't have the type of technology. And despite our school having that technology, there were still so many skills that were lacking. So not being able to know how to do those basic things meant that we went from being able to see a student directly in person, addressing a need right away, to trying to figure out how we want to connect with them. So I think that's the biggest thing. And again, I would say this as well, and I don't know, Chloe, I'm curious if you felt like the focus on social emotional learning was more a thing when we were all at home versus when we came back. It seems like that's going out the window, and now all we're doing is focusing on the academics. That's how I felt.
Is that what you felt too, Chloe?
Yes. They just don't care about us like mentally. Like it's all about getting the test scores up or it's about getting the grades.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I will say, I know that it feels that way. If I feel that way too, not that I don't care about the social, because I really do, but I think in my position, I feel like the focus has shifted. I remember when we were doing remote learning, like everybody was at home. As a staff, we did a lot of things to try to connect with one another. We took special days to just meet and check in with each other, staff member to staff member, and that has not continued since we've been coming back in person. Mm-hmm. And it's still very much needed.
Right. And Dr. Erickson, I know you've made reference to what you saw in your patients, your youngsters that ranged across the developmental age there. But what did you hear parents being most worried about for their kids?
So the parents really have been concerned about the mental health of the children. And I think, one thing that is really important and a way that we can help support parents is when they see a particular behavior, to help them think, okay, what's behind that behavior? And so if the child is talking back or irritable or sassy or disrespectful, that instead of focusing on, I want to stop this behavior and tell them not to talk to me that way, to empower them to take a step back and think, okay, what's going on underneath? What are they feeling? What are they experiencing that's causing them to react this way? And how can I support them and get them help when they need it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sylvia, you want to dive into that third area we were going to talk about, because now we're hearing some of the symptoms. What do we do to address these symptoms?
Well, and that's exactly correct. I mean, as each of you have been talking, I've been scribbling notes here with exclamation points and very concerned on a personal level and hearing what you have experienced. And I know our audience would have this as well. And we have joining us each month, and particularly today, we have a range of people from nonprofit organizations, from the school system, parents themselves, and from faith communities. So as we look at these stresses and challenges that each of you has mentioned, what can our community, what can parents do, but what can our community do to support and address some of these issues, particularly those people who may not have a student in school, but feel very concerned about the long-term impact? Dr. Erickson, again, you mentioned such things as physical, long-term physical aspects and so on. So starting with you again, is there something that community members can take away from this conversation and do from a practical standpoint?
Well, I think one thing that's really important is that it is going to take the whole community working together on this. It's not something that, is just on the school system or just on parents. It really is going to needs to be a community-wide focus. I think we need to get children off of the computers and off of Zoom as quickly as we can. We need to get kids outside, playing together, back in activities, learning how to re-engage with one another in a way that's not through technology. We need to educate ourselves on what are the warning signs in children and adolescents of mental health concerns. We need to really focus as a community on mental health resources. As a pediatrician, as I've been working to support patients and their families, the number of resources available to me has actually decreased this year, and we need to invest in that. And in schools, we need to make sure that we meet kids where they are. That if they failed classes this year, that doesn't mean that they don't graduate from high school. That we can't, start back next year thinking that they will be the way that they would be if this had been a normal year, but meeting them where they are in a compassionate and supportive way, and making sure that they have the extra help and resources that they need to continue to learn.
Mm-hmm. Specifically, you mentioned about resources decreasing and your perception that had occurred from an advocacy standpoint, both governmental, nonprofit, any specific suggestions or tips that you can pass along to our participants?
We definitely need more child psychiatrists in Winston. It's a long, long wait to get in to see a child psychiatrist. And we need more counselors that are available for patients, particularly with Medicaid, without insurance, bilingual counselors. And I think as a community to increase our knowledge of being trauma informed in the way that we engage with students and their families after the trauma they've been through in the past year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And just acknowledging that it has been trauma.
Yes.
Trauma, definitely. Thank you. Those are hopefully can generate some questions as we continue our discussion today. Chloe, what about you? What would you say to people out there if this is what you in this community could really do to help us? What would you say?
I agree that we do need more people available for counseling and stuff because personally, I wish I could go to counseling. I mean, it's probably a way for me to go to counseling, but we don't really know. I have lots of friends who would love to get counseling and stuff because a lot of times we can't talk to our parents and stuff about certain things, and we don't have nobody to talk to. Like, we always would have somebody, maybe a teacher or somebody to talk to in school, but there's not a way to express that because we're all in the Zoom call together. And also maybe like people understanding in the community that just because we're online, it doesn't mean it's easier. It doesn't mean we're just passing because we're online. A lot of times people believe, oh, well, you're online, you should make all A's, but not realizing the impacts, having to log in and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish like it'll be more like resources. I know my school, like we have them on a workshop. That would be really good to teach people how to use technology and stuff because a lot of people still don't know. And it's just gonna get harder and harder because I don't feel like, we're probably still being this, doing things the way we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And like people don't know how to use their emails, don't know how to use Canvas still. I feel like we just have like some kind of workshop
Okay. And Chloe, I know that you are a member of the Youth Grant Makers in Action group, I believe, at the Winston-Salem Foundation. And that's a very important role for young people. And has there been any discussion among your group or with the foundation about how your group could maybe help provide some of these resources or at least foster this discussion?
Yes.
Don't want to put you on the spot, but you're in a position to talk about that.
This year, we try to focus more on things to help with the COVID impact. So a lot of grants we gave out, they mainly focus on helping the community or, helping the youth and the COVID impacts. And we just want to make things easier because we all say the same things, technology, not having Wi-Fi, computers. And it was this year, it was kind of harder because we didn't want to give the money out just to anybody. We really wanted to give out to people who was going to help the youth. Now we see the effects, of everything.
Good, good. Well, it sounds like you're in the position to continue to address these things that we're talking about. Thank you very much. And Amber, what about you from a perspective of how the community could help the role that you have and that other counselors have? Very specific kinds of things we could be thinking about.
Well, I just, as you asked the question, I began to think about some things that we have experienced. And, on a couple of occasions, we had to contact, CPS in certain situations,
CPS meaning Child Protective Services.
Protective Services, yes, because of things that came out. Some students did know how to use their email or were means to contact us, and they let us know when things were going on. What we saw, though, was that, and I know it has to do with just the overwhelm of the system, some cases weren't taken, and it could have been because I think the focus is on, just the people who don't have their basic needs met. So things that we would typically report, in a regular year, oftentimes those cases weren't taken, or they were just like, we can't focus on that right now because we're trying to focus on just the bare minimums, those who need, to be moved. We had a situation where a child probably needed to be removed from the home, and it took several calls before anything was really done. And that was frustrating to see. But I mean, I understand everybody is being impacted by this global pandemic. So that was one area I think definitely could use support. I know that they had a lot of turnover in social services in that area in particular. I believe students need to have, like Dr. Erickson mentioned, they need to have some social connections. As I mentioned before, gaming seems to be a way for a lot of kids to connect, but kids need to get outside and play. They need to get some fresh air, some vitamin D. That would do everyone. It's great for mental health. So I think maybe some ways to promote that, activities that the community could put in place would be helpful, beneficial. As far as counselors go, I wish we could definitely have more counselors in the building because there's such a need for what we do. And, in my school, there's only 2 of us. I have an intern this year, which is really wonderful because she's really helped to kind of spread the load and spread the wealth of work that we have to do. But we need more support people in schools, outside of schools, as mentioned before.
Okay, good.
Could I interrupt just a second and ask you to follow up on something you said, Ms. Harrington? You mentioned that you're seeing and hearing more potential suicide. And so as you learn that, how are you able to respond to help students? Because I think we were all troubled when we saw the article in our paper a month or so ago about the young man in Kernersville that had committed suicide. And we wonder how many are on the edge like that. Okay, I think I'm frozen.
Yeah.
Are we frozen here? We lost something.
Dr. Erickson, can you maybe fill in on that answer while we're waiting for Ms. Harrington to come back if possible?
Yeah, so we definitely are seeing more students that have suicidal thoughts. And I think that it would be a great thing to focus on as a community too, to help parents know how to talk to their children, to ask them if they have thoughts of hurting themselves. Your pediatrician or family doctor is a great resource also if you have a concern about children, and we can help with that suicide assessment. But it's definitely important to be aware of it and to know that there are students who have thoughts of suicide right now.
Thank you, Dean.
Let's shift gears a little bit. We always are trying to say, is there something to be learned, to be gained from this traumatic and difficult and challenging year we've just been through? So I wonder if we've learned anything that might actually help us transform our schools in some new ways. What can we do that would create in school the kind of welcoming and supportive environment for every single student, that they would be nurtured in such a way that they can maximize their learning and their potential, and that these social emotional needs won't go unaddressed? Chloe, if you could design the active school, I mean the ideal school, when, you know, here you are graduating, what kind of legacy would you like to leave to say, if I were starting over again, here's what I wish school would have been like? What would you like to see changed?
I feel like we should keep at least one day out of the week where we don't have to come to school, like how we have it now. That would help emotionally. That helps a lot. I feel like they should focus on the student personally and not look at it as a group, you know, look at the student, what the student needs and what they need from a teacher. And I feel like if we're more taught, like if they teach more with technology, you know, do more things on a computer, because that's all we're going to probably do for now. It's everything on the computer. And then a school that focuses on not just like the good kids, not the bad kids, but focus on everybody. Because I feel like sometimes in certain areas they focus on just a certain type of kid. Like, you know, they don't focus on, okay, well, this because that kid is doing good doesn't mean they're doing good emotionally. Or just because that kid's doing bad with his grades doesn't mean that he doesn't have a chance to bring it up. Just focus on everybody focus on them. Don't focus on the overall group. Focus on people one by one, like making a way like a curriculum like made for one person. So like asking, okay, well, do you like to do learning by yourself, or do you want to like do a group learning, hands-on, stuff like that? Like make it more different. Like don't just have a teacher. Sometimes they only do one teaching style. They don't change it up or try to like, you know, fit the needs of the students.
Okay. Dean, Miss Arrington is back with us.
Oh, good.
Good. So your question earlier.
Good.
I'm sorry. I think my internet just completely like went out. Had to try another one. This is what happens during this remote learning.
So I think we're kind of caught in two fields right now. We were asking you about how to respond as you're identifying these kids that may be in danger of suicide, and
Yes.
and then also what kind of long-term lessons about how we can create a more supportive and welcoming environment for all kids.
Got it. Okay. So what I was saying was that a lot of times there are kids that we don't hear about unless a friend contacts and say, hey, you know, such and such is saying this, you know, and then we're able to check on them. And that's a lot of the times the way that we find out is when another friend mentions that they're concerned about another person. Few of them actually come forward and say, I'm having these thoughts. Which is scary because that means a lot more than we know are actually having these thoughts. And so I would say being able to have people, friends, groups in place where kids feel comfortable. I actually had some students approach us here recently. They said they wanted to have an odd club, a club for people who are different. You know, but having different groups like that where people can feel like they connect in some way would be really helpful. And those friendships, you know, if they keep supportive adults in the mix, that's a great way to ensure that there is a trusted adult when they're having thoughts or when they're not feeling well, to be able to come to say, you know what, um, something's not right. I would say parents, everybody, we got to take this stuff seriously. If you are seeing certain behaviors and things like that, you can't ignore it. You must take it seriously. Um, and sometimes people don't. They just kind of treat it like, oh, they're just, you know, being a teenager. But some things just aren't normal. One thing that I heard a lot from parents was that their children were spending all their time in their rooms. They did not leave their rooms very much, maybe to eat, and that's it. So they're in their room, it's dark, they're looking at a computer screen, they're not getting any socialization. Those types of things really will cause anyone to not be well. So doing things together as a family, doing things together with friends, even if it has to be virtual. I mean, you know, we got to be safe still, but engaging with others in healthy ways, I think, is going to be key.
Mhm. Good.
I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that in addition to the fears regarding health, the difficulties economically, that there's also been the layer of what's been going on in our society, not just this year, but brought to the forefront this year in terms of violence against folks because of their race or ethnicity. And so I wouldn't want to close out this session on social emotional without asking you if you're hearing people able to share their concerns about that. The students, are they able to be honest about their feelings about what's happening, or how they feel threatened because of race or ethnicity?
I personally haven't had any students to come forth with those feelings, but I acknowledge that they're there, and I wonder oftentimes how they're feeling. You know, when this all started, if we remember, you know, everything was happening with George Floyd, so that was another big issue that was affecting everyone. You know, so I think that trying to create a space where students feel comfortable discussing those things, a non-judgment zone, is so important. Um, and I will say this as well, because I've been having these conversations with colleagues. I'm concerned about all of our students, including our white and Caucasian students. How are they feeling about how the focus is shifting? Um, and what I mean by that is that, you know, if they don't know the history of what's going on, they may not understand why they might be looked at in a certain perspective, even though it's no fault of their own. I hope I'm making sense when I'm saying that. But I feel like, you know, right now we're looking at, oh, you know, how are the Black and African American community impacted? Oh, how we're looking at the Asian community is impacted, and they are, and we are. Um, but I don't want our students who are of white and Caucasian descent to feel like they're being looked at as the criminal. You know, I want them to understand how everyone is feeling, so that way they can help empathize better with one another. Because I don't think they realize the impact that's happened over the years. Like, I feel like everybody else has been taught, you know, this is what's happened, and we understand, but I don't think everyone understands. And I hope that by doing that, we can create a space where everyone feels comfortable, everyone feels safe, and not just, you know, certain groups. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Dean, one thing that I've noticed in my patient families is that at the beginning, COVID very much disproportionately affected communities of color. And there has been, in a lot of my patient families, a heightened anxiety related to COVID because they had a more personal experience, knew more people that died from it. And that my sense is, and I haven't seen the data, is that fewer students of color have returned back to in-person learning because they are more afraid of COVID. And I think that we need to be sure that we're we're communicating with families the safety protocols that are in place in the schools so that they can feel comfortable sending their children back to schools. That a lot of the students that really need to be there are not going back because their families don't trust that schools are a physically safe place for them to be because of COVID.
And that's a good point. And are you doing anything through your practice to try to address that gap in information?
Yes, I definitely recommend, that they go back to school and talk about the data, that schools are safe, encourage the parents to get their vaccine. I have that conversation with almost every family there. There's vaccine hesitancy across our community, but that's one of the best things that we can do to make things safe for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you say that about you mentioned how the minorities seem to be more affected by that, and as I think about it, a lot of the COVID deaths of parent deaths that I've seen are affecting our our Black and Latino communities, which is of great concern. But because there are also so many comorbidities in that group, it's extra fear. I have, parents that are like, well, I have this condition, I have that condition. I don't feel comfortable with, my kids to come back into the building because I don't want to get sick. It's a really stressful thing because the kids don't want to feel like if their parents were to get sick, like it would be their fault. That would have a whole nother level of impact. So it's tough to make that decision about whether they feel safe or not to return in person.
Mm-hmm.
Even as we encourage our audience to ask questions, Ms. Harrington, I want to go back to something you said. I gathered that there's so much concern about people having fallen behind academically, and your worry about doing anything that would interfere with teachers' attempts to catch them up, that it's hard to address all of these social emotional concerns. And so again, thinking about the future and sort of redesigning our schools so that we can adequately address both academic equity, but also social emotional concerns. What would you introduce that would be different about our environment in school that might create a more socially, emotionally supportive environment for kids?
Glad you asked that question. I feel that for me personally, what I've been wanting to see is that flex day, the focus be on social emotional things. That it's not just, yes, it's a day to catch up, but also how I've envisioned it and how my student support team, if we've discussed what we'd like to see, is a day where we can, perhaps, offer yoga and mindfulness and have, times to meet with counselors or times to check in, do small groups, things like that, or even see it become a part of the school day. Like just like you have any other type of class, have a whole time where you're focused not on anything academic, but just the personal, social, emotional piece. That way it's embedded in the whole school day and the whole school year. It should not just be because we're out of school. It should be because we need it to be healthy individuals, and to even teach us just how to be emotionally aware of others. I will just say, and it's kind of cool because I noticed one of my former teachers is on here, Miss Nash. So I grew up in Winston-Salem, and I went to Moore Elementary, and it was a phenomenal experience, I must say, because we always had time. We called it big group. And it was a time where we got together, we discussed things, and we were able to really learn about how to get along with one another and how people were doing. And I feel like having those types of things, even today, amongst all levels, in some way would really be beneficial for all of us, and including the adults.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How would you respond to that, Chloe? I'm aware that, for example, in Freedom School, that's a summer program, but that there's an activity called Harambe, which gets the day started off with a high energy sort of social emotional connection and excitement about the day. Can you suggest a way that maybe day could start differently at school that would put an emphasis, or how do you like the idea of flex days being associated primarily with social emotional wellness?
I don't like that better because right now, like you brought up Black Lives Matter and all that stuff right now going on. We don't going to a school like I go to, basically a minority school, Black and Hispanic students. It's very hard for us. We already looked at bad, and just having a day that we're not constantly being told, "Oh, well, you're dumb. You're not gonna go nowhere in life." The stereotypical stuff we get told every single day. Having a day where we can just let go, and be able to all talk, because half the time we can't talk together. Like, we're always in class doing schoolwork, and having a flex day where we can just relax and talk about all the problems that's going on. Because half the time we don't talk about it because we don't know how maybe the teachers might feel, and a lot of people are not educated on the problem because our history classes do not teach us about our history half the time. So I feel like having a day where we can just express all of this will help us.
Mhm. Very good. Very good.
We could keep talking indefinitely because I have an idea, as is often the case with social emotional concerns, that it takes a while to start really getting down to the real stuff. And maybe we're really getting down to some of that now. And if you need to linger afterwards, that would be great. But I would like for Sylvia to be able to tell you a little bit about our next Faith in the City, which should be a chance to re-envision how school can be in the future. So, Sylvia, take it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. And as at least one participant has mentioned in our chat, as you can see, that maybe this is the time to begin thinking about turning the corner, looking at new programming, new partnerships, and particularly partnerships between the school system and our community, and learning from this. We appreciate the wonderful discussion today, and we always appreciate what you bring to us, everyone that's here and our participants. We're very excited that next month in May, our speaker will be Ms. Patricia McManus, our superintendent of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, as our final Faith in the City session before we break for the summer. Ms. McManus will share with us her reflections on the challenges and successes of this past school year. She has a lot to reflect on, and also to talk about the educational priorities for our school system as we move into the summer and next fall. And hopefully a lot of the priorities that have come from many of the discussions that we've had. So we hope that you will join us on Tuesday, May the 4th. For that next session. And also, even though this will be our last session for our typical September to May timeframe, we also want to hear from you about ideas that you have for generating topics for next year. We continue to feel led that educational equity should be our primary focus. The more we unpack this, the more we really learn about it ourselves, and everyone who has shared with us, we know that there is a lot that our community still needs to do. And so we want to capture this, we want to capture these ideas. So please contact any of us on the planning team. There is a email address in the chat there, and we welcome any of your thoughts today. And I will just reiterate something that Dr. Nash has put just now in the chat, that maybe we need to lobby the state for an educational reset, given the numbers of people who have been negatively impacted by COVID-19, and give schools some transition time to begin to incorporate all of this. So that's certainly a provocative thought, and one that we're glad to leave with today. So thank you again to our participants. You brought us so much and such a varied perspective, those of you on the panel, and we really appreciate your sharing so directly with us and so emotionally with us yourselves. We know that you have strong feelings about that. So thank you very much. We will be recording this session as we do each time, and sharing that on the Knollwood website. And that information is in your chat as well. And we'll also be sending that out to those of you who are part of our email list. If you want to be part of that email list, please contact us and we'll put you on that. So if there's any other thoughts, we will stop the actual recording here, but we know you would chat in the parking lot if we were in person. So we'll leave the call open for a bit longer so that you can share with each other. But thank you again for being here. Thank you to our three panelists, really experts in your respective areas. Thank you for sharing that with us.